He's locking up his storage room when a neighbor storms in, demanding answers loud enough to wake the dead. Minutes later, the cops roll up. But what unfolds isn't what she's betting on. What went down at this restaurant? Stick around till the end to get the full scoop. Before we jump in, drop a quick comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I'm dying to know how far this video's traveled. Oh, and don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you're locked in for these wild stories every single day. No more waiting. Let's dive right in. Darius Hill stood in the cramped alley behind his restaurant, Hill's Haven, the city night wrapping around him like a cool, heavy coat. It was pushing 10:30 p.m., and the downtown streets, usually buzzing with honking cabs, chattering pedestrians, and the hum of neon signs, had finally mellowed out. A yellowish street lamp flickered overhead, throwing jagged patches of light across the wet pavement and the stacks of crates he was inspecting. Fresh collard greens still damp from the supplier, ripe tomatoes stacked in tight rows, thick cuts of prime beef waiting to hit the grill. He gripped a clipboard, its edges worn soft from years of use, and jotted notes with a stubby pencil. His nightly ritual to keep everything tight for the next day's chaos. For Darius, this wasn't just some chore, it was his lifeline. A quiet moment to connect with the dream he'd fought tooth and nail to build. At 45, Darius was a man who'd clawed his way up from nothing to make Hill's Haven a name people knew. 15 years back, he'd started with a rusted-out food truck, a loan from a skeptical bank, and a handful of recipes scribbled on yellowed index cards. His grandma's secrets, handed down over Sunday dinners in her tiny shotgun house. He'd hauled that truck to every street fair, late-night market, and shady parking lot he could find, flipping burgers and frying cornbread until his hands blistered and his shirt stuck to his back with sweat. Bit by bit, he'd saved enough to lease this spot, a narrow brick building squeezed between a boutique and a vape shop, and turned it into a culinary haven. Now, it was the kind of place where folks lined up around the block. Instagram foodies snapped pics of his Cajun steak, and critics tossed around words like genius and soulful in their reviews. To Darius, it wasn't just a gig. It was his heart poured onto every plate, a legacy carved out of grit and grease. He tugged at the collar of his faded jacket, not some crisp chef's whites, just a practical gray thing he'd grabbed from a thrift store years ago, and locked the last crate with a soft click. The air carried a faint whiff of garlic from the kitchen exhaust, mingling with the damp, gritty smell of asphalt. A scent that grounded him, reminded him of where he'd come from. He tucked the clipboard under his arm, ready to head inside and call it a night, when the sharp clack of heels echoed off the alley walls. He turned, squinting into the dim light, and saw her. A woman, mid-50s, blonde hair yanked back in a tight bun, dressed in a pristine white sweater and tan slacks that screamed HOA meeting chic. Her arms were crossed, her lips pressed into a thin, accusing line. Karen, a newcomer who'd moved into the upscale condos a few blocks over just 2 weeks ago, stood there like she owned the whole damn street. "What are you doing back here?" she barked, her voice slicing through the stillness like a car alarm nobody asked for. Darius blinked, caught off guard for a split second, his tired brain lagging after a 12-hour shift. "I'm closing up my storage. This is my restaurant," he said, keeping his tone level, his deep voice steady, despite the flicker of irritation creeping up his spine. Karen took a step closer, her heels snapping against the pavement, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Your restaurant? Yeah, I don't buy that for a second. I know who owns this place, and it ain't you." He glanced up, his brow creasing just enough to show he'd registered her tone. After a marathon day, chopping onions till his eyes burned, searing steaks till his forearms ached, plating dishes till his legs begged for mercy, he was running on fumes, but he kept his cool. "I'm Darius Hill. I own this restaurant, just checking my inventory before I head out," he said, his voice a low rumble, steady as the hum of the kitchen exhaust fan still whirring behind him. Karen folded her arms tighter, tilting her head like she was inspecting a used car with too many miles on it. "Oh, really now? You own Hills Haven? The place where people wait an hour just to snag a table?" She let out a short, dry huff, her tone dripping with sarcasm that stung like lemon juice in a cut. "I don't think so, buddy. I live around here. I know what's what in this neighborhood. The owner of Hills Haven isn't someone like you." Darius shrugged, turning back to his clipboard, scratching off another item. 5 pounds of potatoes, check. "I'm the owner. Believe it or not, that's your call," he said, keeping his eyes on the list, his pencil moving with the same deliberate care he used to season a roux. But Karen wasn't about to let it slide. She marched closer, her heels clicking like gunfire on the pavement, her finger jabbing the air right at him. "No, no, no. Don't you talk to me like that. I know Hills Haven is upscale, classy as hell. The owner's supposed to have some style, some real presence, not be out here in a ratty old jacket, messing with boxes like this." He stopped writing, lifting his head to meet her stare, his dark eyes calm but unyielding. "If you know the real owner, what's his name, go ahead, tell me." Karen thrust her chin out, her voice hard as steel. "I don't need to know his name. I can tell just by looking at you. The real owner doesn't do dirty work in some nasty alley like this. They're sitting in an office, dressed sharp, shaking hands with VIPs, not hanging around back here like you." Darius exhaled through his nose, folding his arms across his chest, the clipboard pressing against his ribs. "Like me? What's that mean?" Karen waved her hand wildly, her voice climbing higher, bouncing off the walls. "I mean, look at you. You don't look like you own a place like Hills Haven. I've eaten there. I know what the customers expect when they walk in. They want someone who fits the vibe of a fancy-ass restaurant, not you." He raised an eyebrow, his tone slow and deliberate, cutting through her noise like a knife through butter. "Fits how? Spell it out for me." Karen's face flushed pink, but she didn't flinch, her words tumbling out like she'd been rehearsing them. "You know damn well what I'm saying. The owner's gotta have a certain look, okay? I've lived in this country my whole life. I know who usually runs these high-end joints. You're out here checking veggies like some worker. You think I'm dumb enough to swallow that you're the real deal?" Darius stared at her, his voice still steady, a quiet anchor in her storm. "This is my restaurant. I work here to keep it running smooth. You think owners don't get their hands dirty?" Karen cut him off, her voice hitting a pitch that could have shattered glass. "No, that's not how it works. Real owners hire people for this crap. You're just pretending, faking it. I see you out here all alone, this late in this filthy little alley. You look more like a thief than a boss. I'm not letting you pull one over on me." He shook his head, a faint shadow of frustration crossing his face before it settled back into calm. "I'm not pulling anything. I own this place. Got the papers to prove it." Karen swatted the air like she was shooing a fly, her voice sharp as a slap. "Papers? Oh, I bet you cooked those up too. I know what this neighborhood needs, and it ain't you. I've got a duty to keep it safe from people like you." "People like me?" Darius echoed, standing taller, his broad frame filling the space without effort. "You keep saying that. What do you mean?" Karen snorted, planting her hands on her hips, her stance wide like she was bracing for a fight. "I mean, you don't belong here. You don't look like you own a fancy restaurant. I walk by this place every damn day. I know who should be in a spot like this and who shouldn't. Stop acting like I'm some fool who can't see through you." Darius shrugged again, leaning back against a crate, his arms still crossed. "I'm not acting. This is straight up the truth." But Karen wasn't hearing a word. She yanked her phone from her purse, holding it up like she was about to call down lightning. "Fine. You want to play this game? I'm calling the cops right now. If you're really the owner, you won't mind explaining it to them, right? I'll stand right here and watch you get hauled off in cuffs." Darius stayed put, his posture relaxed but solid, like a tree rooted deep. "Go ahead. I'm not going anywhere. Karen punched the numbers into her phone, spinning away but throwing him a glare over her shoulder, her eyes glinting with mistrust. Hello, 911. I need to report a suspicious guy in the alley behind Hills Haven. He says he's the owner, but I don't believe him for a hot second. He's rooting through boxes looking real shady. Please come quick, she barked into the receiver, her free hand flailing like she was directing a parade, her voice loud enough to rattle the windows above. Then she turned back, smirking, like she'd already won. Cops are on their way. Better figure out your story, 'cause I know you're not the owner. I'm gonna prove it, mark my words. Darius locked eyes with her, his voice as even as ever. I don't need a story. You'll see the truth. Soon enough. Karen stood there, hands on hips, her eyes blazing with a mix of triumph and fury. Oh, I'll see all right. And when they drag you off, don't you dare say I didn't warn you. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, the red and blue lights flashing closer, turning the quiet alley into a tense, pulsing showdown. The two police cars screeched to a halt at the alley's mouth, their flashing lights slicing through the night, painting the brick walls in harsh streaks of red and blue that danced across the crates and wet pavement. Officer Reed stepped out first, a tall figure with a square jaw and a no-nonsense air, his hand resting lightly on his belt near his badge. Officer Lopez followed, younger, with a quick half-smile that faded as he took in the scene. Darius standing by the crates, arms crossed, his broad frame steady, and Karen pointing at him like he'd just torched her house. Karen charged forward, her voice shrill enough to pierce the fading echo of the sirens, her words tumbling out in a rush. Thank God you're here. I caught this guy messing around back here. Caught him red-handed. He's got the nerve to say he's the owner? This guy? No freaking way he owns Hills Haven. I know who this place belongs to, and it's not some lowlife like him. She thrust her chin high, hands planted on her hips, her tone thick with scorn, spitting venom with every syllable. Check him out quick. I'd bet my house he's got a knife stuffed in that pocket just waiting to cause trouble. Darius straightened up, taking a deliberate step forward, his presence filling the alley like a quiet storm. His eyes were sharp, unwavering, but his voice stayed low and commanding, cutting through her noise with the weight of hard-earned truth. I'm Darius Hill, the legal owner of Hills Haven. Here's my business license, my driver's ID, and the lease agreement, all with my name on them, signed and dated. He reached into his jacket, pulling out his worn leather wallet, and handed over the stack of documents with a calm certainty that didn't need to shout. If that's not enough, I can unlock the restaurant right now, show you the security footage from the last hour, the invoices from my suppliers, whatever you need to see. This is my place. I built it from nothing, starting with a food truck 15 years ago, scraping by till I could afford these walls. I don't need anybody's okay to stand on my own damn property. Officer Reed took the papers, his fingers flipping through them with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times, his eyes scanning the details under the glow of his flashlight. Officer Lopez glanced at Darius, then lit up like a kid spotting his favorite superhero, his voice buzzing with excitement. Hold up a sec. You're Darius Hill, the chef from Taste of the City? Man, I've been hooked on your Cajun steak since I caught that episode. Didn't you snag Chef of the Year around here, too? My buddy was at that awards thing. He wouldn't shut up about your gumbo. Officer Reed nodded, handing the documents back with a rare flicker of a smile. Yeah, that tracks. My wife booked a table here for our anniversary last year. Food was out of this world. Best meal we've had in ages. You're the real deal, Hill. No question about it. Karen flinched like she'd been slapped, her face turning a furious shade of red, but she roared over them, her voice cracking with rage as she drowned out their words. No way in hell. You're all wrong. He's lying through his teeth. I live here. I know this neighborhood inside out. There's no chance he owns this place. He probably stole those papers off somebody or faked them in his basement. She stabbed a finger at Darius, her voice hitting a pitch that echoed off the alley walls. Who do you think you are, huh? Don't stand there acting all big and bad with me. I know who belongs here and who doesn't, and you sure as hell don't fit the bill." Darius locked eyes with her, his voice dropping to a deep, resonant tone that carried an unshakable authority, each word landing like a stone. "I'm Darius Hill. I've owned this restaurant since it was a beat-up truck with a busted tire. I've fed thousands, regular folks scraping by, celebrities throwing cash, critics who write my name in their fancy columns. Ask anyone on this block. They'll tell you who I am. You don't believe me? That's your mess to sort out, but don't stand here spinning lies about me like you've got a clue." He turned to Officer Reed, giving a single firm nod. "If you need more, I can call my lawyer right now, have him pull every record from the city, the bank, the tax office. Everything I've said holds up, and I've got the proof to back it." Karen screeched, cutting him off, her voice a wild mix of fury and desperation. "Lawyer? Oh, don't you dare try to scare me with that crap. You're a fraud, a damn con artist, and I'll prove it. Officers, arrest him already. Don't let him weasel out of this." She flailed her arms like a windmill in a storm, her face twisted into a snarl, her blonde bun wobbling as she shouted like she was commanding a battlefield instead of two baffled cops. Officer Lopez frowned, stepping closer to Karen, his tone edged with impatience. "You just said he faked his papers and's packing a knife. Where's your proof for any of that?" Karen stammered, her voice faltering but still defiant, her hands clenching into fists. I don't need proof. Just look at him, he can't be the owner. You guys blind or stupid?" Darius crossed his arms, his expression cool and unshaken, his deep voice slicing through her chaos. "You just accused me of a crime in front of two officers. I don't need to say another word. My papers do the talking." Officer Reed took a step toward Karen, his tall frame casting a shadow over her, his voice low and stern, cutting through the alley's tension like a blade. "Darius Hill is the legal owner of Hills Haven. His documents are legit. Name, dates, signatures, all of it checks out clean. You called us out here, claiming he's suspicious, then doubled down saying he forged papers and's carrying a weapon, all with nothing to back it up. You know that's public slander, right? That's not just a mistake. That's a line you crossed." Karen stumbled back a step, her bravado cracking like thin ice, but she still jutted her chin out, yelling to salvage her stance. I was just protecting the neighborhood, okay? He doesn't look like an owner. He's in a beat-up jacket screwing around in this alley. I've got every right to call that out." Her voice trembled, but her eyes still burned with stubborn fury, refusing to bend, even as the ground shifted beneath her. Darius faced her, his tone steady and unshaken, carrying the quiet strength of a man who'd weathered worse storms. "You've got the right to think what you want, but you don't get to make up lies about me. I'm here every day, busting my ass to keep this place alive, cooking, cleaning, whatever it takes. You don't like how I look doing it? That's your baggage, not mine." By now a small crowd had trickled in near the alley's edge, drawn by the flashing lights and Karen's shouting. Tom, a lanky 20-something in a hoodie, held up his phone, filming it all, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "She just called Hill a fraud right in front of the cops. This video's gonna blow up, mark my words." Linda, an older woman with gray curls and a coffee mug in hand, stepped out from her stoop across the street, shaking her head as she called out, "Karen? You're dead wrong here. Darius is the best guy in this whole damn neighborhood." Officer Lopez turned to Karen, his voice sharpening, his patience wearing thin. "You wasted our time with a false report, pulled us out here for nothing. Then you went and threw around accusations that could land you in court for slander. Hill's got every right to sue your ass off. You get how deep you're in this now?" Karen's face drained of color, her hands trembling around her phone, her bravado crumbling into dust. "Sue me? I didn't do anything wrong. I was just making sure, that's all." She spun toward Darius, snarling one last desperate jab. "You think you've won this? Huh? I'll tell the whole neighborhood about you. I won't let this slide, you hear me?" Darius shrugged, his voice as calm as a still lake. unshaken by her threats. Go ahead and tell them. The truth doesn't twist just because you don't like the shape of it. He glanced at Officer Reed, his tone softening but firm. I'm not here to blow this up. I just want to go home. Been a long day. Officer Reed nodded, but pinned Karen with a hard, warning stare, his voice like gravel. You'd better quit while you're still standing, ma'am. This is your first strike. We'll log it and call it a night. But if Hill presses charges, which he damn well could, that video's got you pinned. You're not walking away clean here. Tom laughed, waving his phone like a trophy, his voice ringing out, 50 live viewers already. Holy crap, Karen, you're a freaking star now. Karen froze, her face a mask of panic as the crowd's whispers swelled into a low roar. People pointing, muttering, some shaking their heads in disbelief. She turned away, her earlier swagger gone, replaced by a hunched shuffle and a flicker of dread she couldn't hide. Officer Reed faced Darius, his tone softening, a trace of regret in his eyes. Sorry we had to drag you through this, Hill. Shouldn't have gone down like this. Darius gave a small nod, a faint smile tugging at his lips, weary but unshaken. It's all good. I've seen worse days. 5. Resolution. Darius glanced at the officers, his deep voice warm but steady, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who'd built his world from the ground up. If you guys aren't in a rush, I can whip up something quick for you to try. Call it a thank you for showing up. Officer Lopez's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas, his grin wide. For real? Man, I'm not saying no to that. Bring it on. He unlocked the back door with a smooth turn of his key, leading them into the kitchen, leaving Karen standing alone in the alley's flickering light. She shuffled off, head bowed low, her heels dragging against the pavement as the crowd's murmurs chased her into the shadows. Tom kept his phone up, shouting after her, "This is going viral, y'all! Karen versus Hill, and guess who's coming out on top?" Inside, the kitchen smelled of warm spices and melted butter, a sanctuary of stainless steel and simmering pots that felt like home to Darius. He fired up the stove, the flame hissing to life as he tossed a pat of butter into a skillet, the sizzle filling the air. He prepped his Cajun steak, seasoning it with a deft shake of his wrist, searing it till the edges crisped just right, while Officer Lopez leaned against the counter, watching like a hungry hawk. When Darius slid the plate over, Lopez took a bite and groaned, his eyes rolling back. Holy hell, this is unreal. How could she think you're not the owner? Seriously? Darius shrugged, plating another dish with the same steady hands that had carried him through a decade and a half of hustle. Happens more than you'd figure. Some folks don't want to see me behind a place like this, but I know who I am. That's what keeps me going. By morning, Tom's video had blown up online, racking up tens of thousands of views under the title, "Karen Calls Cops on Famous Chef Closing His Own Restaurant." The comments poured in like a flood, some folks fuming over the blatant prejudice, cursing Karen's name in all caps, others cheering Darius for keeping his cool under fire, calling him a legend in the kitchen and out. Hill's Haven saw its busiest day in months, the line snaking down the block past the vape shop and the boutique, spilling onto the next street. Customers didn't just come for the food. They came to shake hands with the man who turned a dumb run-in into a masterclass in dignity, snapping selfies with him by the counter, asking about that Cajun steak like it was a holy grail. Karen's world, though, crumbled fast and hard. Linda ran into her at the corner store a few days later, where Karen tried to spin her tale over a pack of gum and a diet soda. "I was just looking out for the neighborhood, you know," she muttered, her voice thin and brittle. But Linda shut her down cold. "Nobody's buying that line, Karen. You've picked the wrong hill to die on." Literally, word spread like wildfire through the block. Neighbors stopped waving when she walked by, their smiles replaced with tight nods or flat-out stares. Kids snickered behind her back, whispering "Alley Karen" as she hurried past, her head ducked low. A local blog picked up the story, running a piece titled "The Fall of Alley Karen, a lesson in minding your own damn business," complete with screenshots from Tom's video and quotes from regulars who'd known Darius for years. It got shared at every coffee shop, barber shop, and dive bar in the district, turning her name into a punchline nobody could escape. One humid evening, Tom caught her on camera again, squabbling with a cashier over an expired coupon at the deli down the street. The clip hit the neighborhood group chat within minutes, captioned, "Karen's at it again. Guess she didn't learn squat." People laughed, but it was a sharp, bitter kind of laugh, the kind that comes when respect's long gone. She had rolled into this area thinking she'd be the queen bee, the self-appointed watchdog of the block. Now she was its laughingstock, a ghost nobody took seriously anymore. At the mailboxes one morning, a guy from 3 doors down muttered to his wife, "She's the one who called the cops on Hill. Can you believe that crap?" His wife shook her head, rolling her eyes. What a clown show. Poor thing's got no one left to listen to her. Meanwhile, a crew of Hills Haven regulars showed up one slow afternoon with a handmade sign, big block letters scrawled in marker, "Thanks, Hill, the real boss." They grinned as Darius hung it by the front door, right under the restaurant's glowing neon name, the bulbs buzzing faintly in the dusk. He stood there for a minute, hands in his pockets, watching the streetlights flicker on, the chatter of customers spilling out onto the sidewalk. The weight of that night in the alley lingered like a bruise, but it was fading, pressed down by the steady rhythm of his life. Cooking, serving, building something real. He didn't need to settle scores or sling mud. Karen had buried herself without him lifting a finger. The truth had a way of cutting through the noise, louder than any shout she could muster. But this wasn't just Darius's win, and it wasn't just Karen's flop. It was a story that rippled out, a cracked mirror held up to anyone who's ever felt those quick, judging eyes on them, sizing them up without a word. Karen thought she was guarding her turf, playing the hero in her own little drama, but all she did was show how small her lens really was, how fast she'd pegged a man's worth by his jacket, his skin, his place in her tidy picture of the world. She'd paid for it not with handcuffs or a courtroom, but with something that cut deeper, a whole community turning its back, leaving her a punchline, echoing through the streets she'd tried to claim. For every Karen out there, there's a Darius, quietly proving that value doesn't wear a uniform or a color, that a man's work can shout louder than a stranger's snap judgment. This wasn't some one-off dust-up in an alley. It was a wake-up call, a spotlight on the kind of prejudice that hides in plain sight, in sidelong glances, and 911 calls over nothing but a hunch. It's a thread that runs through too many lives. The waiter who gets followed around a store, the doctor who gets asked for ID in her own hospital, the kid who gets stopped just for walking home. Karen's lesson wasn't just hers, it was ours. A nudge to check ourselves before we point fingers, to ask instead of assume. Darius kept cooking, kept serving, kept standing tall, not because he had to prove anything to her, but because that's who he was. The sign stayed up, the line kept growing, and the neighborhood kept talking, not about Karen anymore, but about the guy who'd turned her nonsense into a rallying cry. Prejudice doesn't die easy, but it can't stand forever against people who refuse to let it define them. Next time you're quick to judge, take a beat. Look closer, ask a question, because the cost of getting it wrong isn't just a viral clip, it's a story that sticks, a ripple that spreads, a truth that outlasts every lie. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. These conversations matter, and the more we talk about them, the more we can change. See you next story.